In this video, we're going to be showing you why segmentation isn't necessarily as scary as it might sound. I'm James, he's Jamie. Let's talk about segmentation.
Okay, so segmentation. Let's talk about segmentation.
Big one.
Yeah, big one. I mean, all these subjects are big.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, but segmentation is a big
line.
one. It's actually tricky as well, I think. Segmentation is a tricky business because it's something that's not as intuitive, right? I think it's hard to, as a beginner or someone who isn't very well conversed in email marketing, it's where do you start with it?
Yeah.
Learning how to do it, and more importantly, why you're doing it and how to use segmentation effectively is difficult. But segments is something that as marketers you're taught about very early on, right? So it's an incredibly important part of email marketing. Why is it, do you think, that it is such a steep curve in terms of learning how to do it and how to do it effectively?
I think the tricky part of segmentation is that usually when you suggest it to a client, the response you get back is, that means I'm going to have to create separate emails for all of these different demographics within my list.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to run a newsletter as it is, whether you're sending weekly or monthly. Usually you're stretched for time, and we've just been talking about testing and all of these things. Adding a layer of segmentation into that and saying, well, now you're going to have to send different messaging to different demographics based on, various metrics that we might look at.
Yeah,
it feels like an incredibly tall order. So I'd say first and foremost, ESPs make it relatively simple to start segmentation, and with AI and its increasing popularity, that process is only getting easier and smarter. But the suggestion that you're going to have to create bespoke content for each of your segments is misleading, and it's certainly not what we would ever want to imply. Instead, segmentation, I think, is most easily used when you combine it with automation. So yes, you have to put in that initial groundwork, but once you've set up the automation process, let's take a simple one like a sunsetting series, for example, which is the process of automatically unsubscribing any recipients who aren't engaged with our content. Once we've written that series of emails, maybe it's just one email, but usually a sunsetting series would be 2 or 3. Once we've done it, we can set automations in place such that every time someone falls into that criteria of unengaged, and we'll set those parameters ourselves, the emails will automatically fire out. So the recipient feels like they're getting a targeted, personalized experience, but it could be being sent whilst we're sleeping.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what I like about segmentation the most is how you make the experience feel right for the receivers of the emails, because it feels more personalized. It feels like you get your audience a bit more. You're not necessarily preaching to the converted, or you're saying the right thing to the right people, and that's why segmentation is so important. Have you seen the film What Women Want with Mel Gibson?
Is he like, do you work in like advertising?
So my recollection is fairly vague as well, but it's he gains the ability through being, I think, struck by lightning or something, of course, to be able to read women's minds, which is obviously incredibly funny at the start and humorous. And probably, in retrospect, maybe a bit misogynistic if you rewatch the movie nowadays.
Hasn't aged well.
No, he's a womanizer as well in this film. So the whole thing is about a learning process, about really learning about what women want, and I'm sure it doesn't age well if you view it as its entirety. But why that's relevant to segmentation is because the story is that he works in an advertising agency, and he's been tasked with creating adverts that resonate with women. Right, and you see him really. He doesn't impress. I think it might even be Nike who are the clients, and he makes a pitch before he's able to hear what women think, and he doesn't get it because he doesn't get what women want, right? And that's the whole point of the film. And then he learns through certain romantic expeditions and different experiences, and he has a daughter as well, and he's split up from his wife, and all these different experiences with women, and he's having a conversation with them, but also hearing about what's in their what they're thinking as well.
Right.
So he then learns more about women, right? And then he's able to create a pitch which then does resonate with women, and it's all happy days because he gets the client and creates a great marketing campaign.
Sounds like an emotional roller coaster.
Oh, it's an emotional roller coaster. Yeah. It's a good film. It's funny. I'm sure there are those that are out there that would say, well, why don't you just put a woman in charge of head of marketing for closing the Nike deal as opposed to a mind reading Mel Gibson. But the point is with segmentation is that it's almost a bit like that, right? Just without the misogynistic 90s views of things, right? It's you get to learn more about your audience, and you get to, when you know who they are and what they want to hear about as a whole list, it's even more pertinent when you then do it for the segments of your list, right? Because you can tailor your content specifically for the different segments, and that's what I like so much about it. But it can be a tricky business.
Yeah, and I would say there are lots of ways that you can do this, and another potential barrier that doesn't really exist for anyone who's thinking about segmenting is they'll say, I don't really know enough about my audience in order to segment, and so. We often speak to clients who want to send questionnaires to their list, which can be a good way to gather some data, but you're only ever going to get quite a small response for something like that. It's quite work intensive for the recipient, and usually expectations of response rates are unrealistic. So a great starting off point is not to think about customer data that you collect on email entry, but instead, as we've already discussed here, to look at the engagement metrics that you already have about your audience. It could be email engagement. It could be, if you have access to it, if you run an e-commerce store, it could be their browsing behavior. It could be the kind of products that they tend to buy. You can look at their purchase history. So there are loads of clever ways that we can segment our audience that don't require any input from them. Even through A/B testing, we can start to segment our audience. Okay, we know that this demographic really like emojis and this demographic don't. We know that this demographic tend to respond to CTAs that have a price included, and this demographic prefer to not have the price disclosed straight away.
Yeah.
There's no limit to kind of how far you want to go down this rabbit hole, but plenty of the data that you need to start segmenting is already at your fingertips if you're already email marketing.
Yeah, precisely. And I would say if you're in e-commerce, you have the upper hand because you have many more data points, don't you, on your subscribers?
Yeah.
By virtue of the fact that they're going through the checkout process in your store.
You're basically Mel Gibson, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Without the lightning. So segmenting based on engagement, right, and how they engage with your emails is one of your favorite go-to segments to start off.
Yeah.
Right off the bat, right? It's
I like
something.
it.
So you can instantly see who the most engaged people are on your list.
Yeah.
When you've segmented that out, how would you use that segment?
So there are loads of ways that you can potentially put that to use. Whether it's sending that particular demographic more content.
Yeah.
That's one way to do it. You might be able to cultivate a community around those most engaged subscribers as well, which can be interesting. You're more likely to get feedback from them. They're more likely to leave product reviews, whatever it might be. So there are ways that you can galvanize that loyalty to your advantage.
Yeah.
From a more email sciencey perspective, there are loads of benefits to knowing who your most engaged demographic and indeed your least engaged demographics are as well.
Yeah.
For example, we've already talked about the importance of keeping that spam rate low. If you are teetering on that border of that 0.3% threshold, sending more emails to the guys that you know are going to open your emails and not send it to a spam complaint is a great way to tilt that average away from the dreaded 0.3%. Equally, if you're migrating email service providers, moving from MailChimp to Klaviyo, for example, you're going to have to do some list warming activity involved there. That's a whole separate topic, but knowing who your most engaged subscribers are will make that loads easier for you and will help you to establish a better sender reputation.
That's a great point. We didn't even rehearse that point. It's just you've come off the bat of that. So I like that. Well done. So I'm not going to quiz you on this. I'm just going to tell you the stats, but research has shown that you get 30% more opens if you're targeting a segmented audience, as opposed to just generally targeting your whole list. So a 30% increase in opens is fairly significant for you to stand up and take notice.
Yeah.
In terms of a click-through rate, so that's the proportion of people that are clicking, the proportion of people that have opened your emails and then clicked. an increase of 50%, but from targeting segmented portions of your list as opposed to your general list. So yeah, those they're big enough for you to kind of stand up, take notice, and think about how you could perhaps use segmentation, right?
That's great. What about the other side of the coin? Like, how would you use the unengaged segment to your advantage as well? Because that's another, maybe talked about a little bit less, but also important to know who's not opening your emails.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess there's a bigger question here of, you mentioned about targeting your most engaged subscribers to swing that spam complaint rate, right? But there's a bigger question there that instead of looking at the short-term fix, it's, well, why is my spam complaint high for the people that aren't my most engaged subscribers, right? Yeah. So by portioning those people off, running some tests and stuff for those people, you can then set up the automations like you mentioned earlier, the sunset automation as well. So there are different ways that you can get to know that unengaged audience, because there are learnings there.
Yeah.
Probably more learnings from that segment than there are for those that you can garner from your most engaged people as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I'm guessing if you had one tip for people that don't have any segmentation in place, what would that one tip be?
I would say look at the functionality that your email service provider will definitely offer to help you get started. And that sounds obvious perhaps, but I think a big barrier for entry is worrying that it's going to be too complicated. It can be complicated, but it's as complicated as you want it to be. And every email service provider will have built-in functionality to help you create segments. It will effectively create these segments for you. You can give them titles. And at the very least, then, you can start to understand a little bit. It was very surprising for me, for example, to learn the number of people who always open my emails versus the number of people who never open them. And actually, the numbers can be disappointing, perhaps, but by the same token, incredibly informative. So, your email service provider will help you do this. You just need to click that segmentation button and start. And I promise you, it won't be as scary as maybe it seems.
So there we go. Again, no excuses to not get started with segmentation. And if it is all too much and you can't handle it, I know an email marketing agency that might be able to help you out. So
who's that?
Yeah.